The thick hedgerows of Normandy stretched endlessly through the French countryside in June 1944. An American patrol pushed forward with extreme caution through the impenetrable bocage. Every muscle tensed with alertness, every nerve stretched to breaking point. The summer air hung heavy around them. It carried the sharp bite of spent gunpowder. It reeked of cordite that burned their nostrils. Hidden somewhere in the maze of ancient earthworks ahead lay German infantry. These weren't green recruits. These were seasoned fighters. Men who knew how to kill. Men confident in their proven methods. Their weapons had been tested across Europe. Their tactics had crushed armies from Poland to France. Then it happened. A sound erupted that would haunt German nightmares for months to come. This wasn't the single crack of a sniper's rifle cutting through morning air. This wasn't the steady rat-tat-tat of a machine gun laying down suppressing fire. This was something entirely different. Something purely American. The bone-rattling roar of a Thompson submachine gun unleashing hell at 600 rounds per minute. The weapon German military analysts had written off as worthless. The gun their officers had laughed at in planning rooms. Too bulky for infantry work, they said. Too costly for mass production. Too tied to American gangster movies to take seriously. The submachine gun that Hollywood had made famous in countless crime films flickering across cinema screens worldwide. Now that same weapon rested in the hands of American infantry. It was rewriting every rule of close-quarters warfare. One heavy .45 caliber bullet at a time. Each round screamed downrange at 850 feet per second. Each impact delivered devastating stopping power. This is how the Thompson M1A1 submachine gun carved its name into military history. Not through slick advertising campaigns, not through Hollywood glamour and movie magic, but through the cold mathematics of battlefield effectiveness, where German soldiers discovered, often in their final moments, that the best answer to mockery is a withering storm of lead. Before America joined the Second Global Conflict, something strange had occurred in the world of military weapons. The Thompson submachine gun had achieved worldwide fame, but not for the reasons its creator had envisioned. Brigadier General John T. Thompson had crafted his weapon in 1918. He called it a trench broom, a tool designed to sweep German positions clean, a weapon to shatter the bloody deadlock of World War I. The gun arrived months too late for that war. The armistice came before Thompson's creation could prove itself in European trenches. Instead, it found its first notorious fame on the violent streets of Prohibition-era Chicago. Al Capone's gunmen clutched them during bloody turf wars. FBI agents carried them while hunting down public enemies. The Thompson earned the nickname Chicago typewriter. It became the signature instrument of Prohibition's violent drama. Both criminals and law enforcement chose it for its devastating firepower. When Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow met their violent end in 1934, Texas Rangers were firing Thompsons through their car windows. The weapon's association with organized crime created a reputation that completely overshadowed its military potential. European military experts dismissed it as an expensive American novelty, a weapon far too costly for practical mass production, too heavy for real infantry soldiers to carry effectively, too connected with American gangster culture to be considered seriously by professional armies. German officers reviewing intelligence reports on American small arms in the late 1930s gave the Thompson barely a footnote mention. The German military possessed their own submachine gun designs, the MP-38 and its improved successor, the MP-40, weapons the Allies would later nickname the Schmeisser. These guns weighed significantly less than the Thompson. They were simpler to manufacture in wartime factories. They were easier to maintain under harsh field conditions. German confidence seemed completely justified. Their submachine guns had proven themselves repeatedly in combat. They had dominated during the Spanish Civil War. They had crushed Polish resistance in weeks. They had swept across the lowlands of Europe with unstoppable efficiency. They fired practical 9mm rounds at controlled rates. This conserved precious ammunition while delivering devastating close-range firepower. Compared to these proven weapons, the Thompson appeared to be an outdated relic, a remnant from an earlier philosophy of weapons design that prioritized craftsmanship over practicality. Then, 1939 arrived and changed everything completely. Britain entered the war facing an immediate and desperate crisis. The British Army had zero domestic submachine gun production capacity. None whatsoever. Their infantry depended entirely on bolt-action rifles. These were superb weapons for long-range precision shooting. They were utterly inadequate for close-quarters combat situations. Desperate for any form of automatic weapons, the British Purchasing Commission looked across the Atlantic to America. They placed enormous orders for Thompson submachine guns. Almost overnight, the expensive American curiosity became Britain's military lifeline. The early Thompson models carried a price tag of roughly $200 each. In today's purchasing power, that equals over $3,000 per weapon. They were precision machined from solid blocks of steel. The level of craftsmanship belonged more on fine hunting rifles than combat weapons. Each Thompson required countless hours of skilled metalworking labor to complete. The barrel featured distinctive cooling fins running its entire length. The muzzle incorporated a cuts compensator designed to reduce barrel climb during automatic fire. An adjustable rear sight allowed for precise range estimation even at extended distances. Even the charging handle mounted on top of the receiver reflected an earlier era of weapons philosophy. American factories struggled desperately to meet surging British demand. Auto Ordnance Corporation and Savage Arms worked around the clock, ramping up production lines. But the incredibly complex manufacturing process severely limited output numbers. The United States Army watched war clouds gathering across both oceans. Military planners began asking uncomfortable questions. If America entered this expanding conflict, would sufficient Thompsons be available for American soldiers? The answer came back as a resounding and troubling no. Something fundamental had to change immediately. The solution emerged from Savage Arms' engineering department. They examined every single component of the Thompson design. They asked one simple but revolutionary question. What elements could be eliminated without compromising basic reliability? The result became the M1 Thompson, officially introduced in April 1942. Shortly afterward came the M1A1, standardized in October of that same year. The cooling fins disappeared from the barrel completely. Field testing had proven them totally unnecessary for combat effectiveness. The cuts compensator vanished as well. The weapon functioned perfectly without this complex muzzle device. The elaborate adjustable rear sight gave way to a simple L-shaped fixed sight that soldiers could use instinctively. The top-mounted charging handle relocated to the right side of the receiver for easier operation. The ornate vertical foregrip was replaced by a simple wooden forearm that was cheaper to produce and easier to grip. Most significantly, engineers eliminated the Blish locking system entirely. This was a complex, delayed blowback mechanism that extensive testing proved completely unnecessary. The simplified M1 and M1A1 models operated on straight blowback action, exactly like the German MP40 that had proven so effective. Rigorous testing proved this actually improved weapon reliability under combat conditions. The famous drum magazines disappeared completely from standard issue. Those 50-round behemoths had looked impressive in gangster movies, but they were prohibitively heavy for soldiers to carry. They rattled loudly when troops moved, compromising stealth. They were fragile under harsh field conditions and prone to jamming. The new models used only box magazines, 20 or 30 rounds of 45 ACP ammunition in a reliable, lightweight package. The cost savings were absolutely dramatic. The early M1928A1 model cost the government $209 per complete unit. By spring of 1942, the M1 had dropped to $70 each. By February 1944, the M1A1 cost just $45, including all accessories and spare parts. But would this simplified weapon prove itself effective in actual combat conditions? American Marines were about to discover the answer. August 1942 brought the Battle of Guadalcanal, the first major American offensive operation in the Pacific Theater. Marines stormed onto hostile beaches carrying M1928A1 Thompsons. These were the older, heavier models, with all their original complexity intact. The jungle warfare they encountered differed completely from anything most had trained for stateside. Visibility measured in feet rather than hundreds of yards. Enemy ambushes erupted from every direction without warning. The traditional advantages of range and accuracy became meaningless when hostile soldiers lurked 10 feet away in impenetrable undergrowth. The Thompson proved its battlefield worth immediately and decisively. In close jungle encounters where fights lasted mere seconds, the weapon's devastating firepower gave Marines a crucial survival edge. The heavy .45 ACP round, that massive subsonic bullet, punched through palm fronds and light vegetation that would deflect smaller calibers completely. When those bullets struck human targets, they struck with tremendous force. The sheer mass and diameter created massive tissue damage and hydrostatic shock that instantly incapacitated enemy soldiers. But the weapon faced significant criticism from field commanders. The Thompson weighed over 10 pounds when fully loaded, roughly equivalent to the weight of an M1 Garand rifle. For Marines already burdened with ammunition, grenades, canteens, rations, and medical supplies, that extra weight accumulated during long patrols through steaming jungle terrain. The .45 caliber rounds were heavy as well. This severely limited how much ammunition individual soldiers could practically carry during extended operations. Some Marines complained that the large, slow bullet lacked sufficient penetration through heavy jungle growth and thick vegetation. A Marine Corps after-action report from New Georgia Island in October 1943 specifically noted this penetration limitation. Yet, those same reports acknowledged factors that couldn't be quantified in technical specifications. The psychological impact of that distinctive Thompson sound on both friendly and enemy forces. The confidence American soldiers felt carrying a weapon capable of unleashing such concentrated firepower. The simple statistical fact that in jungle ambush situations, soldiers armed with Thompsons demonstrated significantly higher survival rates. As one Marine raider expressed in interviews later compiled in military histories, the Thompson was rugged and completely reliable. It fired the same readily available ammunition as the standard M1A1s 45 pistol that officers carried. Marine raiders consistently favored it over other available weapons. These were elite soldiers whose lives depended entirely on choosing the most effective combat tools available. Across the Atlantic Ocean, a different type of testing ground awaited the Thompson. North Africa, in November 1942, saw Operation Torch, the massive Allied invasion of French-controlled Morocco and Algeria. American soldiers were experiencing their first sustained combat against veteran German and Italian forces. By this point, significant numbers of the new M1 and M1A1 Thompsons were reaching frontline American units. The desert environment presented completely different challenges than Pacific jungle warfare. Longer sight lines meant rifles often dominated most engagements, but modern warfare rarely allowed soldiers to choose their preferred fighting distances. Cities required house-to-house clearing operations. Surprise encounters occurred around every street corner. Nighttime raids demanded weapons capable of neutralizing multiple targets quickly and quietly. German infantry veterans of campaigns across Europe initially underestimated American combat effectiveness severely. The Africa Corps had fought experienced British forces to a complete standstill for many months. These confident, battle-hardened soldiers expected green American troops to break under their first real combat test. They hadn't properly calculated the impact of the Thompson submachine gun. In urban combat situations, in the close confines of North African towns and cities, American soldiers with Thompsons proved surprisingly tenacious and effective. The weapon's weight, so often criticized in training, now became a significant tactical asset. It absorbed recoil effectively, helping soldiers maintain accurate control during sustained automatic fire. The .45 caliber round didn't ricochet as erratically as 9mm rounds inside stone buildings. The sheer volume of fire capability, 30 rounds discharged in under 3 seconds if necessary, provided American troops with covering fire that could suppress entire German infantry squads. German after-action reports began noting American proficiency with submachine gun tactics. The previously dismissive tone toward American weapons started to fade noticeably. These weren't gangsters spraying bullets wildly in all directions. These were properly trained soldiers who understood how to employ their weapons effectively. Soldiers who had absorbed the hard-earned lessons that only actual combat experience can provide. Nevertheless, skepticism remained strong in many military circles. The Thompson was significantly heavier than the German MP-40. 7.5 pounds unloaded versus just under 9 pounds for the fully loaded Thompson. It was more mechanically complex to field strip and properly clean. It fired a larger, heavier cartridge that meant soldiers carried substantially less total ammunition for the same carried weight. Evaluated purely on paper specifications, German weapons appeared clearly superior in most measurable categories. But warfare isn't conducted on paper. The real test arrived in Europe, beginning with the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. It continued through the brutal, grinding Italian campaign. It reached its ultimate crescendo on the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944. D-Day represented the largest amphibious invasion in human history. Among the 156,000 Allied troops who landed on those 5 heavily defended beaches, thousands carried Thompson submachine guns into battle. Paratroopers of the elite 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, jumping behind enemy lines in pre-dawn darkness, especially favored the Thompson for its proven reliability and concentrated firepower. Many paratroopers borrowed Thompsons from mortar crews before boarding their transport aircraft. They understood that in the confused, chaotic fighting following their nighttime landing, a submachine gun would literally be worth its weight in gold for survival. The iconic photograph captures this moment perfectly. A paratrooper sits with his face painted for war, clutching his Thompson as he prepares to board a C-47 transport aircraft. Private Clarence Ware applies war paint to Private Charles Plowdo's face. Both men belong to the legendary 101st Airborne Division. The Thompson in Plowdo's hands isn't a movie prop or training device. It's a combat tool he'll desperately need in the next few hours if he expects to survive the night. On the beaches themselves, soldiers struggled through surf and sand under withering German defensive fire. The Thompson, with its sealed action design, continued functioning even after complete saltwater immersion. Army Rangers and regular infantry units used them effectively to suppress German defensive positions, to clear concrete bunkers, and to fight their way off the killing ground of the beach into the relative safety of the seawall. Then came the hedgerows, the bocage country of Normandy, where ancient earthen banks topped with dense, impenetrable hedges divided every single field into a natural fortress. This terrain created close-quarters combat on an unprecedented grand scale. Every hedgerow might conceal German infantry positions. Advances were measured in yards rather than miles. Individual battles raged for days over single fields. Here, in this maze-like terrain, the Thompson truly came into its own as a combat weapon. In the confused fighting of the bocage, engagements occurred at ranges measured in feet rather than yards. When American soldiers burst through gaps in hedgerows, they often found themselves face to face with German defenders at point-blank range. The Thompson's exceptional rate of fire and heavy bullet construction gave American troops a precious advantage during those first crucial seconds of contact. Those initial moments often determined who lived and who died in hedgerow combat. Veteran combat soldiers began specifically requesting Thompsons from their supply sergeants. Tank crews, operating in cramped vehicle interiors that made rifles completely impractical, routinely carried them. Military police units favored them for controlling prisoners and guarding vital installations. Officers and non-commissioned officers who needed to direct fire while simultaneously engaging targets found the Thompson ideally suited to their requirements. But the weapon's most devoted believers were soldiers who operated behind enemy lines. Reconnaissance patrols gathering intelligence deep in hostile territory. Raider units conducting penetration missions far from friendly support. Ranger companies operating independently for days at a time. These soldiers, functioning far from any backup assistance, needed weapons they could trust absolutely under any conditions. The Thompson's hard-earned reputation for rugged dependability made it their automatic choice. German soldiers were rapidly learning respect for this American weapon. Captured enemy documents and prisoner interrogations revealed dramatically changing attitudes toward American small arms. The Thompson, initially dismissed as ineffective, was now described as formidable, effective, and devastating in close combat situations. German veterans who had faced both British Sten guns and American Thompsons invariably rated the Thompson as the more fearsome weapon in actual combat. Much of this assessment came down to ammunition characteristics. The .45 ACP round was large, heavy, and relatively slow-moving compared to other submachine gun cartridges. It left the barrel at 850 feet per second. Subsonic velocity meant it didn't produce the distinctive crack of faster rounds. But what the cartridge lacked in velocity, it more than compensated for in sheer mass and diameter. A 230-grain bullet, nearly half an inch in diameter, striking a human target at close range, created massive hydrostatic shock and devastating tissue damage. The round's low velocity meant it typically remained inside the body, transferring all its kinetic energy to the target rather than passing completely through. In brutal combat terms, soldiers struck with .45 ACP rounds from Thompsons went down immediately and stayed down permanently. This wasn't merely American propaganda or exaggerated claims. German soldiers reported identical observations in their own combat reports. The heavy American cartridge possessed, in their own documented words, serious stopping power that couldn't be ignored. A soldier struck in the torso with a .45 round from a Thompson, even if not immediately killed, was effectively removed from combat action. Compare this devastating effect to 9mm rounds fired by German submachine guns. Higher muzzle velocity, certainly. Greater penetration through obstacles, absolutely. But the smaller diameter and lighter weight produced significantly less tissue damage and hydrostatic shock. A determined, adrenaline-fueled soldier, struck with a 9mm round, might continue fighting effectively. The same couldn't often be said about anyone hit with a .45. By late 1944, the Thompson M1A1 had become the standardized American submachine gun across all theaters of operation. Over 1.3 million weapons had been manufactured in American factories. They equipped American, British, Canadian, and Free French units throughout every theater of the global war, from the hedgerows of France to the coral islands of the Pacific, from the mountains of Italy to the frozen hills of the Ardennes forest. The Thompson proved its combat worth thousands of times over. But the true story of the Thompson transcends mere specifications and production statistics. It's fundamentally about the soldiers who carried these weapons, the desperate battles they fought, the crucial moments when training and courage and concentrated firepower combined together perfectly. Consider the assessment of Charlie Bendick, drafted into service in 1943. He experienced combat with the 24th Infantry Division across the Philippines, New Guinea, and Palau Island. His evaluation was simple and completely direct. He liked the Thompson. It was an excellent combat weapon, not because it achieved perfection in every specification. No weapon ever achieves perfection, but because when circumstances became critical, when his life hung in the balance, the Thompson functioned reliably. It proved rugged enough to operate in jungle humidity and desert sandstorms. It demonstrated reliability sufficient to trust when mechanical failure meant immediate death. It possessed power adequate to eliminate threats before those threats could eliminate him. These weren't the isolated experiences of a single soldier. Thousands of combat veterans echoed virtually identical sentiments. The Thompson was undeniably heavy. It was expensive to manufacture under wartime conditions. It required regular cleaning and careful maintenance. But it worked consistently. In the most critical test possible, the ultimate test of actual combat, it worked when soldiers needed it most. The weapon became so highly prized that soldiers would purchase them, borrow them, or even steal them from other units. Tank crews returning from patrol missions would discover their Thompsons had mysteriously vanished, taken by infantry soldiers who understood the weapon's true combat value. When the M3 submachine gun, nicknamed the Grease Gun, arrived as the Thompson's cheaper replacement, many Marines simply refused to surrender their battle-worn but completely trusted Thompsons. There's something profoundly revealing in that stubborn refusal. The M3 was significantly lighter and simpler to operate. It was much easier and cheaper to manufacture. Based purely on paper specifications, it should have been universally preferred by combat soldiers. But veterans who had experienced actual combat understood something that rear-echelon designers and procurement officers didn't fully grasp. They had learned to trust the Thompson with their lives, and in combat situations, that level of trust is earned through the hardest possible experience. By the time Germany surrendered unconditionally in May 1945, the Thompson had permanently secured its legendary status. More than 1.5 million weapons had been produced during the war years. They had served in every major American military operation, from Guadalcanal to Okinawa in the Pacific, from Kasserine Pass to the Rhine River crossing in Europe. The weapon had definitively proven wrong everyone who had initially doubted its effectiveness. The European military observers who had dismissed it as prohibitively expensive. The German officers who had severely underestimated its battlefield effectiveness. Even some American military planners who had worried about its weight and manufacturing cost. In the final analysis, none of those peacetime concerns mattered as much as one fundamental battlefield fact. When American soldiers desperately needed a weapon, they could rely on completely in close combat. The Thompson was there. When they required concentrated firepower capable of suppressing enemy positions, Clearing rooms and winning desperate close-range firefights, the Thompson delivered consistently. The German infantry soldiers who had initially mocked it learned, often in their final moments, that mockery provides no defense against determined soldiers carrying truly effective weapons. The 45 ACP rounds that struck them weren't abstract statistics or theoretical calculations. They represented the tangible result of American industrial capacity, engineering expertise, and tactical doctrine all functioning together seamlessly. The soldiers who carried those Thompsons from the beaches of Normandy to Pacific atolls understood something that transcended technical specifications and procurement debates. They understood that in combat situations, reliability matters infinitely more than weight. That stopping power matters more than manufacturing cost. That trusting your weapon completely matters more than any other single factor. The Thompson M1A1 wasn't a perfect weapon by any measure, but in the brutal mathematics of warfare, it was more than good enough. And in the capable hands of American soldiers, it was absolutely devastating against enemy forces. The winter of 1944 delivered one of the most desperate battles in the entire European war. The Battle of the Bulge represented Hitler's final gamble, a massive surprise offensive launched through the snow-covered Ardennes forest. The German plan aimed at splitting Allied forces completely and recapturing the vital Belgian port of Antwerp. For 6 brutal weeks, American soldiers faced some of the most ferocious fighting of the entire global conflict. The Belgian forests would witness legendary moments etched by the Thompson M1A1. Snow fell thick that January day in 1945. Holzheim, Belgium sat frozen under artillery fire. First Sergeant Leonard Funk Jr. faced an impossible situation. His 82nd Airborne Company had bled out during weeks of brutal fighting. Casualties mounted daily. When orders came to assault a German strongpoint, Funk couldn't assemble a proper platoon. Battle had consumed his riflemen. Desperation breeds innovation. Funk gathered whoever remained breathing. Clerks who normally pushed pencils. Headquarters personnel used to typewriters and supply forms. 30 men total. None were proper infantry anymore. The snow reached their waists as they advanced. Artillery shells screamed overhead. German positions bristled with machine gun nests. These makeshift soldiers pressed forward anyway. Funk led from the front. Somehow they succeeded against veteran Wehrmacht troops. 30 German soldiers raised their hands in surrender. The strong point fell. Funk left 4 guards with the prisoners. He had no choice. More German positions needed clearing. Every able body mattered when clerks fought seasoned infantry. The war demanded constant motion. Stop moving and die. But battlefield plans rarely survive contact with reality. A German patrol emerged from the tree line. White camouflage capes made them invisible against snow. They looked exactly like American troops in winter gear. The 4 guards realized their mistake too late. Overwhelming force crushed their resistance. Germans freed the prisoners within minutes. Weapons appeared in enemy hands again. An ambush took shape rapidly. Funk returned expecting secured prisoners. Instead, he walked into a courtyard filled with armed enemies. 80 German soldiers surrounded him. A Wehrmacht officer stepped forward. His pistol gleamed in winter light. The officer's voice cut through frozen air. Surrender demanded immediately. No negotiation offered. The numerical advantage seemed overwhelming. Victory appeared certain for the Germans. Time stretched like elastic. Funk's shoulders sagged in apparent defeat. His hands moved toward his Thompson M1A1. The motion looked like surrender. The German officer allowed satisfaction to cross his face. That satisfaction lasted exactly 1 heartbeat. Funk brought the Thompson up in fluid motion. 30 rounds emptied into the officer at point-blank range. The sound shattered the winter silence. Before German soldiers could react, Funk reloaded. His hands moved with practiced speed. Another magazine slammed home. He fired again while shouting orders. His men grabbed weapons and joined the fight. Chaos erupted in that frozen courtyard. Muzzle flashes lit the snow like lightning. The acrid smell of cordite filled the air. Screams mixed with automatic weapon fire. Less than 60 seconds changed everything. 21 German soldiers lay motionless in crimson snow. 24 more writhed with wounds. The remainder threw down weapons for the second time that day. Funk and his men had won impossible odds. 10-to-1 odds meant nothing against devastating firepower. Speed and audacity trumped numbers. The Thompson delivered exactly what its design promised. Leonard Funk earned the Medal of Honor for those 45 seconds. His own assessment afterward remained characteristically simple. The Germans made a mistake. They gave him an opening. The Thompson did what it was designed to do, nothing more complicated than that. Stories like Funk's repeated across 2 theaters of war. Jungle ambushes in the Pacific, house-to-house combat in Europe, urban warfare through shattered cities. The Thompson proved itself in every environment imaginable. Real combat against determined enemies, conditions that destroyed lesser weapons. But the Pacific theater presented unique challenges no European battlefield could match. Guadalcanal's steaming jungles tested everything. New Guinea's humidity reached 100% daily. River crossings meant complete weapon immersion. Amphibious landings soaked equipment in salt water. Coral dust penetrated every mechanism. Salt spray corroded metal within hours. Some Marine commanders criticized the Thompson harshly. Colonel Victor Krulak spoke at Army Ordnance meetings. His words cut deep in December 1943. Too heavy for jungle warfare. Uncomfortable during long patrols. Poor function in tropical conditions. Water and sand destroyed reliability. The weapon couldn't handle continuous immersion. Krulak wanted lighter alternatives for Pacific fighting. His criticism seemed damning and final. Yet other Marines told completely different stories. Combat veterans praised the same weapon Krulak condemned. They called it a lifesaver in desperate moments. How could men fighting identical enemies reach opposite conclusions? The answer revealed fundamental truths about infantry combat. Context determined everything. Circumstances mattered more than specifications. What worked brilliantly in one situation became liability in another. Marines on long jungle patrols felt every pound. 10-plus pounds of Thompson through steaming undergrowth. Engaging enemies at longer ranges where .45 caliber rounds struggled. Dense vegetation stopped heavy bullets cold. Palm fronds deflected rounds. Bamboo absorbed energy. The weapon's limitations became glaring obvious. These Marines wanted lighter weapons, smaller calibers that punched through jungle growth. Different tools for different problems. But Marines clearing caves on Peleliu needed different capabilities. Soldiers fighting house to house through Manila faced close-quarters combat. Paratroopers landing behind enemy lines needed immediate devastating firepower. For these men, the Thompson was perfect. The iconic Okinawa photograph from 1945 captured this perfectly. Marines advancing across open ground under fire. One carried a Thompson submachine gun. Another carried a Browning automatic rifle. Both weapons served crucial roles. The bar provided sustained suppressive fire at range. Long bursts kept enemy heads down. The Thompson delivered overwhelming close-range firepower. Together, They formed complementary systems. Neither weapon stood alone. Despite criticism, photographic evidence shows continued Thompson use. Marines carried them with drum magazines through June 1945 on Okinawa. If the weapon was universally despised, it would have disappeared, but it didn't. Soldiers and Marines who trusted Thompsons with their lives refused newer weapons. Combat veterans knew what worked. They kept weapons that had saved them. Human attachment transcended technical specifications. The Thompson story extends beyond individual heroism. It touches deeper aspects of American World War II experience. This was a war fought by citizen soldiers, men who had been farmers before the war, mechanics and students and clerks, men who grew up during the Depression, men who watched gangster movies where Tommy guns featured prominently. Undeniable mystique surrounded carrying a Thompson submachine gun. These young men connected the weapon to American toughness. Popular culture had embedded that image deeply. When a soldier picked up a Thompson, he held more than a firearm. He held a piece of American mythology. British commandos understood this instinctively. They adopted the Thompson early in the war. The weapon became central to their identity. So important was it to commando culture, they incorporated it into unit insignia. A stylized Thompson superimposed on an anchor. An eagle topped the whole design. That symbol remains in use today, decades after the Thompson itself was retired from service. Loyalty earned through reliability endures. Paratroopers jumping into Normandy knew their Thompsons would function after hitting the ground. Rangers storming Pointe du Hoc trusted the weapon wouldn't jam when needed most. That trust earned through thousands of combat actions couldn't be quantified. Technical specifications meant nothing compared to proven performance. By mid-1944, American planners introduced the M3 submachine gun. The grease gun nickname came from its crude stamped metal appearance. Production costs dropped dramatically. Weight decreased significantly. Manufacturing became simpler. Maintenance required less skill. On paper, it was superior in almost every measurable way. Soldiers hated it. Well, not all soldiers appreciated different qualities. Some valued the grease gun's lightweight and simplicity. But many, especially those with Thompson combat experience, viewed the M3 with suspicion bordering on contempt. The Thompson felt solid and substantial. It had heft that inspired confidence. The grease gun felt cheap by comparison. Even when it functioned adequately, the perception remained. This resistance revealed important truths about military equipment. Soldiers don't evaluate weapons purely on specifications. They evaluate them on trust. Trust is earned through shared experience. Blood and sweat create bonds with equipment. The Thompson had earned that trust in Normandy's hedgerows, in Guadalcanal's steaming jungles, in the Bulge's frozen forests. The grease gun hadn't earned anything yet. It lacked combat credibility. Eventually, pragmatism won out over sentiment. The M3 was cheaper and easier to produce in quantity. Perfectly adequate for most purposes. Thompson production ceased in 1944. Over 1.3 million had been manufactured. The grease gun became standard American submachine gun for the war's remainder. But Thompson production stopped because victory seemed assured, not because the weapon was inadequate. In critical years 1942 through 1944, when victory hung in balance, the Thompson had been there. Every weapon mattered during those desperate times. The Thompson did its job completely. That was enough for military planners. German infantry, who initially dismissed the Thompson, learned their mistake through bitter experience. After-action reports from captured documents show evolving respect for American firepower over time. Early war, German soldiers viewed American troops as inexperienced and poorly trained. Equipped with inferior weapons, they said, the stereotype claimed Americans couldn't fight without overwhelming material superiority. Pure propaganda and wishful thinking. Combat demolished those stereotypes completely. German soldiers discovered that American infantrymen, when properly led and equipped, were formidable opponents. The Thompson became emblematic of this realization. It represented multiple American advantages. American industrial capacity that equipped millions with expensive, high-quality weapons. American tactical evolution and willingness to adapt from combat experience. American fighting spirit and determination to close with enemies and win. The Thompson features prominently in World War II imagery and memory for good reasons. Not just nostalgia or Hollywood romanticism, the weapon genuinely mattered in thousands of small, desperate encounters. Across 2 theaters of war, it made the difference. Between soldiers coming home or not coming home. Consider the mathematical reality of firepower concentration. A soldier with a Thompson could fire 30 rounds in under 3 seconds. Astonishing firepower in a single infantryman's hands. Close combat fights are won or lost in seconds. That rate of fire gave American troops decisive edges. German soldiers with bolt-action rifles could fire perhaps 5 aimed shots in the same time. Even soldiers with MP40s could only match, not exceed, Thompson firepower. This wasn't just about killing enemies, though that was certainly part of it. Suppression mattered more in many situations. Winning the firefight created opportunities. Keeping enemy heads down allowed friendly maneuver. Modern infantry tactics recognize that most bullets fired in combat don't hit anyone. Their purpose is suppression, not elimination, creating chaos and confusion that friendly forces can exploit. The Thompson excelled at this role completely. Its distinctive sound alone had psychological impact on enemies. German soldiers learned to recognize that sharp, rapid drumbeat. When they heard it, they knew American infantry were close, were aggressive, were coming for them. That knowledge affected their decision-making processes. Their willingness to hold positions wavered. Their confidence in their own survival decreased. Fear became a weapon itself. The .45 caliber round contributed to this effect. When German soldiers were hit by .45 ACP from a Thompson, they didn't just go down. They stayed down permanently. The heavy, slow-moving bullet transferred massive energy to targets. In combat's brutal mathematics, that mattered enormously. Every enemy soldier put permanently out of action was one less shooter returning fire. American soldiers understood this intuitively. They might complain about Thompson weight during long marches. They might wish for lighter weapons during patrols. But when contact was made and bullets started flying, they wanted that Thompson. They wanted its devastating firepower. They wanted its proven stopping power. They wanted its legendary reliability. Weight concerns vanished under fire. The Thompson M1A1 legacy extends far beyond World War II service. The weapon remained in American military service through the Korean War. Into early Vietnam years, it equipped various units. Military police carried them regularly. Armored vehicle crews trusted them completely. Special operations units used them long after retirement from frontline infantry service. Some nations used Thompsons into the 1970s and beyond. International adoption proved enduring value. But the Thompson's true legacy isn't measured in years of service or units produced worldwide. It's measured in lives saved and battles won. In moments when soldiers needed weapons, they could trust absolutely. The Thompson was there. First Sergeant Leonard Funk survived the war as one of the most decorated American paratroopers in military history. He received not just the Medal of Honor, also the Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star, 3 Purple Hearts. After the war, he served as Pittsburgh Regional Chief of Veterans Affairs Office. He died in 1992 and is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. His legacy lives in the soldiers he led and saved. Charlie Feldback, who fought with the Thompson in the Philippines, New Guinea, and Peleliu, spoke for thousands of veterans. His assessment was characteristically simple and direct. "I liked the Thompson. It was a good combat weapon. Not perfect," he admitted, "not without flaws, certainly, but good when it mattered most. When your life depends on your weapon, good is what matters. Everything else is academic discussion. Combat strips away theory." German infantry who taunted the Thompson learned what American soldiers already knew instinctively. In combat, mockery doesn't stop bullets flying. Superior attitudes don't win firefights decisively. Underestimating enemy equipment is a fatal mistake. The 45 caliber rounds that buried those German soldiers represented more than American industrial output. They represented a complete philosophy of warfare. American doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower at every level, believed in giving individual soldiers the tools to win fights at the tactical level, trusted citizen soldiers with powerful weapons, and expected effective use. The Thompson embodied that philosophy completely. It was expensive, yes. It was heavy, certainly. It required skilled manufacturing and regular maintenance, absolutely. But it worked when soldiers needed it most. In hands of soldiers who trained with it regularly, who understood its capabilities and limitations intimately, who trusted it with their lives completely. The Thompson was devastating in the right circumstances. Today, more than 80 years after M1A1 production began, the Thompson remains one of history's most recognizable firearms. It appears in museums worldwide. Movies and video games feature it prominently. Military memorabilia collectors prize original examples. Its silhouette is instantly identifiable globally. Its reputation endures across generations. But for men who carried Thompsons in combat, the weapon means something different entirely. Not a museum piece or cultural icon. A tool that helped them survive war's chaos. Equipment they could trust when everything else was uncertain. A weapon that, when they needed it most, delivered exactly what they required. The Thompson M1A1 story isn't really about a gun at all. It's about soldiers who carried it into battle. Battles they fought with courage. Courage they showed under fire. Sacrifices they made for victory. The weapon was just a tool in their hands. But in the right hands, at the right moment, it was a tool that changed history's course. From Normandy's beaches to Pacific jungles. From Belgium's frozen forests to Germany's shattered cities. From Guadalcanal to Okinawa. From North Africa to the Rhine River. Wherever American soldiers fought in World War II, the Thompson was there. It wasn't the perfect weapon. No weapon achieves perfection. But it was the right weapon at the right time, in the right hands. In war's brutal arithmetic, that's all that ever matters. The Thompson M1A1 didn't win World War II by itself. No single weapon ever wins a war completely. Wars are won by soldiers and strategy, by logistics and industrial capacity, by national will and determination. But the Thompson played its part in victory. It gave American soldiers fighting chances in close combat. It provided firepower when firepower was needed most desperately. It earned trust of men who carried it into battle. When German infantry, confident in their superior tactics and experience, mocked the heavy American submachine gun as too expensive and too cumbersome and too American, they learned the hardest lesson of all. In combat, what matters isn't what a weapon costs or how much it weighs on the march. What matters is whether it works when you need it most, whether it stops the enemy effectively, whether it keeps you alive. The Thompson worked flawlessly. It stopped the enemy completely. It kept American soldiers alive through desperate fighting. Everything else was just meaningless noise and empty criticism. Those German soldiers who taunted the Thompson learned their lesson, who dismissed it as American extravagance without substance, who underestimated its battlefield effectiveness completely. They learned that lesson the hard way through experience. The 45 ACP rounds didn't care about their opinions. American soldiers carrying those Thompsons didn't need German approval for their weapons. They just needed their weapons to work reliably. And the Thompson worked through every condition, through rain and mud and snow, through jungle humidity that destroyed other weapons, through saltwater immersion and coral dust, through desert sand and Arctic cold, through chaos and violence and desperate confusion of close combat situations. When American soldiers squeezed the trigger, the Thompson fired every time. When they needed stopping power, the 45 delivered completely. When they needed reliability, the weapon functioned perfectly. That's the Thompson M1A1 story. Not perfection, but effectiveness under fire. Not flawless design, but reliable performance when it mattered. Not a weapon that never failed, but a weapon that succeeded when success meant survival. German infantry learned this lesson at tremendous cost. Not paid in production dollars or weapon weight specifications, paid in blood and lives lost. The lesson once learned couldn't be unlearned or forgotten. The Thompson M1A1. The weapon German infantry taunted until its 45 ACP rounds buried them under storms of American firepower. Until they learned that in war, respect isn't earned through specifications. It's earned through combat effectiveness and battlefield results that matter. The Thompson earned that respect not through propaganda or marketing campaigns. Through performance under fire in desperate situations, through trust of soldiers who carried it, through effectiveness demonstrated in thousands of encounters across 2 theaters of war. That's a legacy transcending technical specifications completely. A legacy built on combat, proven reliability over time. A legacy enduring decades after retirement. The weapon German infantry taunted until they learned better through experience. Until the Thompson taught them warfare's oldest lesson. Never underestimate your enemy's capabilities. Never dismiss their weapons carelessly. Never assume superiority based on preconceptions alone. In war, only one thing matters ultimately. What works when everything depends on it? The Thompson M1A1 worked when American soldiers needed it most. That's its story. That's its lasting legacy. That's why it matters. 80 years after it helped win humanity's greatest conflict. Remember the Thompson. Remember the soldiers who carried it. Remember the battles they won. Remember the price they paid. Remember that freedom isn't free.